South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands is a British overseas territory in the southern Atlantic Ocean. It is a remote and inhospitable collection of islands, consisting of South Georgia and a chain of smaller islands known as the South Sandwich Islands. South Georgia is 165 kilometers long and 1 to 35 kilometers wide and is by far the largest island in the territory. The South Sandwich Islands lie about 700 kilometers southeast of South Georgia. The total land area of the territory is 3,903 square kilometers. There is no permanent population on the islands. The present inhabitants of the British government officer, deputy postmaster, scientists, and support staff from the British Antarctic Survey who maintain scientific bases at Bird Island and at the capital, King Edward Point, as well as museum staff at nearby Grytviken. The United Kingdom claimed sovereignty over South Georgia in 1775 and the South Sandwich Islands in 1908. The territory of South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands was formed in 1985. Previously it had been governed as part of the Falkland Islands dependencies. Argentina claimed South Georgia in 1927 and claimed the South Sandwich Islands in 1938. Argentina maintained a naval station, Corbata, Uruguay, on Thule Island in the South Sandwich Islands from 1976 until 1982 when it was closed by the Royal Navy. The Argentine claim over South Georgia contributed to the 1982 Falklands War, during which Argentine forces briefly occupied the island. Argentina continues to claim sovereignty over South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands. History. South Georgia. The island of South Georgia is said to have been first sighted in 1675 by Anthony de la Roche, a London merchant, and was named Roche Island on a number of early maps. It was sighted by the commercial Spanish ship Leon operating out of St. Malo on the 28th of June of the 29th of June 1756. At one time it was confused with Pepys Island, which was discovered by Dampier and Cowley in 1683 but later proved to be a phantom island. Captain James Cook circumnavigated the island in 1775 and made the first landing. He claimed the territory for the Kingdom of Great Britain and named it the Isle of Georgia in honor of King George III. British arrangements for the government of South Georgia were first established under the 1843 British Letters Patent. In 1882 to 1883, a German expedition for the first international polar year was stationed at Royal Bay on the southeast side of the island. The scientists of this group observed the transit of Venus and recorded waves produced by the 1883 eruption of Krakatoa. Throughout the 19th century, South Georgia was a sealer's base as well as a whaler's base beginning in the 20th century, until whaling ended in the 1960s. A Norwegian, Carl Anton Larsen, established the first land-based whaling station and first permanent habitation at Grytviken in 1904. It operated through his Argentine Fishing Company, which settled in Grytviken. The station remained in operation until 1965. Whaling stations operated under leases granted by the Governor of the Falkland Islands. The 7 stations, all on the north coast with its sheltered harbours, were, starting from the west, Prince Olav Harbour, Leith Harbour, Stromness, Hasvik, Grytviken, Godthal, Ocean Harbour. The whaling station's tree works were unpleasant and dangerous places to work. One was called a charnel house, boiling wholesale in Vaseline by an early 20th century visitor. Its putrid vapours, the pong of bad fish manure, and the tanning works mixed together, wrote Tim Flannery, who noted one bizarre peril. A rotting whale could fill with gas to bursting, ejecting a fetus the size of a motor vehicle with sufficient force to kill a man. With the end of the whaling industry, the stations were abandoned. Apart from a few preserved buildings such as the museum and church at Grytviken, only the decaying remains survive. From 1905, the Argentine Meteorological Office cooperated in maintaining the meteorological observatory at Grytviken under the British lease requirements of the whaling station until these changed in 1949. In 1908, the United Kingdom issued further letters patent that established constitutional arrangements for its possessions in the South Atlantic. The letters patent covered South Georgia, the South Orkneys, the South Shetlands, the South Sandwich Islands, and Graham Land. In 1909, an administrative centre and residence were established at King Edward Point on South Georgia, near the whaling station of Grytviken. A permanent local British administration and resident magistrate exercised effective possession, enforcement of British law, and regulation of all economic, scientific and other activities in the territory, which was then governed as the Falkland Islands Dependencies. In about 1912, what is according to some accounts the largest whale ever caught, a blue whale of 33.58 meters, was landed at Grytviken. In April 1916, Ernest Shackleton's Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition became stranded on Elephant Island, some 800 miles southwest of South Georgia. Shackleton and 5 companions set out in a small boat to summon help, and on the 10th of May, after an epic voyage, they landed at King Haakon Bay on South Georgia's south coast. While 3 stayed at the coast, Shackleton and the 2 others, Tom Crean and Frank Worsley, went on to cover 22 miles over the spine of the mountainous island to reach help at Stromness whaling station. The remaining 22 members of the expedition, who had stayed on Elephant Island, were subsequently rescued. In January 1922, during a later expedition, Shackleton died on board ship while moored in King Edward Cove, South Georgia. He is buried at Grytviken. The ashes of another noted Antarctic explorer, Frank Wild, who had been Shackleton's second-in-command on the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition, were interred next to Shackleton in 2011. Argentina claimed South Georgia in 1927. During the Second World War, the Royal Navy deployed an armed merchant vessel to patrol South Georgian and Antarctic waters against German raiders, along with 2 4-inch shore guns protecting Cumberland Bay and Stromness Bay, which were manned by volunteers from among the Norwegian whalers. The base at King Edward Point was expanded as a research facility in 1949-1950 by the British Antarctic Survey, which until 1962 was called the Falkland Islands Dependencies Survey. The Falklands War was precipitated on the 19th of March 1982 when a group of Argentinians, posing as scrap metal merchants, occupied the abandoned whaling station at Leith Harbour on South Georgia. On the 3rd of April, the Argentine troops attacked and occupied Grytviken. Among the commanding officers of the Argentine garrison was Alfredo Estes, a captain in the Argentine Navy who, years later, was convicted of felonies committed during the Dirty War in Argentina. The island was recaptured by British forces on the 25th of April in Operation Parquet. In 1985, South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands ceased to be administered as a Falkland Islands dependency and became a separate territory. The King Edward Point base, which had become a small military garrison after the Falklands War, returned to civilian use in 2001 and is now operated by the British Antarctic Survey. South Sandwich Islands. Captain James Cook discovered the southern 8 islands of the Sandwich Islands group in 1775, although he lumped the southernmost 3 together, and the status as separate islands was not established until 1820 by Fabian Gottlieb von Bellingshausen. The northern 3 islands were discovered by Bellingshausen in 1819. The islands were tentatively named Sandwich Land by Cook, although he also commented that they might be a group of islands rather than a single body of land. The name was chosen in honor of John Montagu, 4th Earl of Sandwich, 1st Lord of the Admiralty. The word South was later added to distinguish them from the Sandwich Islands, now known as the Hawaiian Islands. Argentina claimed the South Sandwich Islands in 1938, and challenged British sovereignty in the islands on several occasions. For the 25th of January 1955 to mid-1956, Argentina maintained the summer station Teniente Esquivel at Ferguson Bay on the southeastern coast of Thule Island. Argentina maintained a naval base from 1976 to 1982 in the lee of the same island, although the British discovered the presence of the Argentine base in 1978, protested and tried to resolve the issue by diplomatic means. No effort was made to remove them by force until after the Falklands War. The base was removed on the 20th of June 1982. On the 10th of February 2008, a 6.5 magnitude earthquake had its epicenter 205 kilometers SSE of Bristol Island. On the 30th of June 2008 at 6 hours 17 minutes and 53 seconds UTC, a 7.0 magnitude earthquake struck the region. Its epicenter was at 58.160 S 21.893 W, 283 kilometers east of Bristol Island. The United States Geological Survey reported that a 7.3 magnitude earthquake had occurred at 10:04 EDT on the 15th of July 2013, 216 kilometers south-southeast of Bristol Island, South Sandwich Islands, at a depth of 31.3 kilometers. The epicenter was located 2,230 kilometers southeast of Stanley, Falkland Islands. Geography. South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands are a collection of islands in the South Atlantic Ocean. Most of the islands, rising steeply from the sea, are rugged and mountainous. At higher elevations, the islands are permanently covered with ice and snow. South Georgia Group. The South Georgia Group lies about 1,390 kilometers east-southeast of the Falkland Islands, at 54 degrees to 55 degrees south, 36 degrees to 38 degrees west. It comprises South Georgia Island itself, and the islands that immediately surround it, and some remote and isolated islets to the west and east-southeast. It has a total land area of 3,756 square kilometers, including satellite islands. Islands within the South Georgia Group. South Georgia Island lies at 54.250 degrees south, 36.750 degrees west, -54.250, -36.750, and has an area of 3,528 square kilometers. It is mountainous and largely barren. 11 peaks rise to over 2,000 meters high. The slopes furrowed with deep gorges filled with glaciers. The largest is Fortuna Glacier. The highest peak is Mount Paget in the Allardyce Range at 2,934 meters. Geologically, the island consists of gneiss and argillaceous schists with occasional tufts and other sedimentary layers from which fossils have been recovered. The island, like the Falkland Islands, is a fragment of some greater landmass now vanished. It was probably a former extension of the Andean system. Smaller islands and islets off the coast of South Georgia Island include Anamkov Island, Bird Island, Cooper Island, Grass Island, John Fruin, Pickersgill Islands, Welcome Islands, Willis Islands, Trinity Island. The following remote rocks are also considered part of the South Georgia group: Shag Rocks, 185 kilometers west-northwest of South Georgia Island; Black Rock, 169 kilometers west-northwest of South Georgia Island and 16 kilometers southeast of the Shag Rocks; Clark Rocks, 56 kilometers east-southeast of South Georgia Island; South Sandwich Islands. The South Sandwich Islands comprise 11 mostly volcanic islands, with some active volcanoes. They form an island arc running north-south in the region 56 degrees 18', -59 degrees 27', 26 degrees 23', -28 degrees 08 W, between about 350 miles and 500 miles southeast of South Georgia. The northernmost of the South Sandwich Islands form the Traverse Islands and Candlemas Islands groups, while the southernmost make up southern Thule. The three largest islands, Saunders, Montague and Bristol, lie between the two. The island's highest point is Mount Belinda on Montague Island. The South Sandwich Islands are uninhabited, though a permanently manned Argentine research station was located on Thule Island from 1976 to 1982. There are automatic weather stations on Thule Island and Zarvodovsky. To the northwest of Zarvodovsky Island is the Protector Shoal, a submarine volcano. The following table lists the South Sandwich Islands from north to south. A series of 6 passages separates each of the islands or island groups in the chain. They are from north to south: Zarvodovsky ISL, Traverse Passage, Visokoi ISL, Brown's Passage, Candlemas ISL, Shackleton's Passage, Saunders ISL, Larson's Passage, Montague ISL, Biscoe's Passage, Bristol ISL, Forster's Passage, Southern Thule. Nelson Channel is the passage between Candlemas and Vindication Island. Climate. The climate is classified as polar, and the weather is highly variable and harsh. Typical daily maximum temperatures in South Georgia at sea level are around 0 degrees Celsius in winter and 8 degrees Celsius in summer. Winter minimum temperatures are typically about -5 degrees Celsius and rarely dip below -10 degrees Celsius. Annual precipitation in South Georgia is about 1,500 millimeters, much of which falls as sleet of snow, which is possible in any month. Inland, the snow line in summer is at an altitude of about 300 meters. Westerly winds blow throughout the year, interspersed with periods of calm. Indeed, in 1963, 25% of winds were in the calm category at King Edward Point, and the mean wind speed of around 8 knots is around half that of the Falkland Islands. This gives the eastern side of South Georgia a more pleasant climate than the exposed western side. The prevailing weather conditions generally make the islands difficult to approach by ship, though the north coast of South Georgia has several large bays which provide good anchorage. Sunshine, as with many South Atlantic islands, is low, at a maximum of just 21.5%. This amounts to around 1,000 hours of sunshine annually. The local topography, however, also contributes significantly to the low insolation. A study published during the early 1960s indicated that sunshine recording instruments remained significantly obscured throughout the year and entirely obscured during June. It was estimated that the theoretical sunshine exposure minus obstruction elections would be around 14% at Bird Island and 35% at King Edward Point, or, in hourly terms, ranging from around 650 hours in the west to 1,500 hours in the east. This illustrates the effect the Allardyce Range has in breaking up cloud cover. Mountain winds blow straight up the western side and straight down the eastern side of the mountains and become much warmer and drier. This produces the most pleasant conditions when temperatures can occasionally rise over 20 degrees Celsius on summer days. The highest recorded temperature was 28.8 degrees Celsius at Grytviken, and 26.3 degrees Celsius at nearby King Edward Point, both on the sheltered east side of the islands. Conversely, the highest recorded temperature at Bird Island on the windward western side is a mere 14.5 degrees Celsius. As one might expect, the sheltered eastern side can also record lower winter temperatures, the absolute minimum for Grytviken being minus 19.4 degrees Celsius, King Edward Point minus 18.9 degrees Celsius, but Bird Island just minus 11.4 degrees Celsius. The seas surrounding South Georgia are cold throughout the year due to the proximity of the Antarctic current. They usually remain free of pack ice in winter, though thin ice may form in sheltered bays, and icebergs are common. Sea temperatures drop to 0 degrees Celsius in late August and rise to around 4 degrees Celsius only in early April. The South Sandwich Islands are much colder than South Georgia, being farther south and more exposed to cold outbreaks from the Antarctic continent. They are also surrounded by sea ice from the middle of May to late November. Recorded temperature extremes at South Thule Island have ranged from minus 29.8 degrees Celsius to 17.7 degrees Celsius. Government. Executive power is vested in the monarch of the United Kingdom and is exercised by the Commissioner, a post held by the Governor of the Falkland Islands. The current Commissioner is Colin Roberts, who became Commissioner on the 29th of April 2014. A Chief Executive Officer deals with policy matters and is Director of SGSSI Fisheries, responsible for the allocation of fishing licenses. An Executive Officer deals with administrative matters relating to the territory. There is also an Environmental Officer and a Marine and AMP Fisheries Officer. The Financial Secretary and Attorney General of the territory are appointed ex officio, similar appointments in the Falkland Islands government. As there are no permanent inhabitants on the islands, there is no legislative council and no elections are held. The UK Foreign Office manages the foreign relations of the territory. Since 1982, the territory celebrates Liberation Day on the 14th of June. The constitution of the territory, the manner in which its government is directed and the availability of judicial review were discussed in a series of litigations between 2001 and 2005 ex parte Quark Fishing Limited UK HL 57. Although its government is entirely directed by the UK Foreign Office, it was held that its decisions under that direction could not be challenged as if they were in-law decisions of a UK government department. Thus, the European Convention on Human Rights did not apply. Economy. As there are no native inhabitants, economic activity in South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands is limited. The territory has revenues of £4.5 million, 80% of which is derived from fishing licenses. Other sources of revenue are the sale of postage stamps and coins, tourism and customs, and harbour dues. Fishing. Fishing takes place around South Georgia and in adjacent waters in some months of the year. with fishing licenses sold by the territory for Patagonian toothfish, cod, icefish and krill. Fishing licenses bring in millions of pounds a year, most of which is spent on fishery protection and research. All fisheries are regulated and managed in accordance with the Convention for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources System. In 2001, the South Georgia government was cited by the Marine Stewardship Council for its sustainable Patagonian toothfish fishery, certifying that South Georgia met the MSC's environmental standards. The certificate places limits on the timing and quantity of Patagonian toothfish that may be caught. Tourism has become a larger source of income in recent years, with many cruise ships and sailing yachts visiting the area. The territory gains income from landing charges and the sale of souvenirs. Cruise ships often combine a Grithviken visit with a trip to the Antarctic Peninsula. Charter yacht visits usually begin in the Falkland Islands, last between 4 and 6 weeks, and enable guests to visit remote harbors of South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands. Sailing vessels are now required to anchor out and can no longer tie up to the old whaling piers on shore. One exception to this is the recently upgraded, repaired yacht berth at Grithviken. All other jetties at former whaling stations lie inside a 200 meters exclusion zone, and berthing or putting ropes ashore at these is forbidden. Yachts visiting South Georgia are normally expected to report to the government officer at King Edward Point before moving round the island. The island has featured in the Warren Miller video storm. Postage stamps. A large source of income from abroad also comes from the issue of South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands postage stamps, which are produced in the UK. A reasonable issue policy along with attractive subject matter makes them popular with topical stamp collectors. There are only 4 genuine first-day cover sets from the 16th of March 1982 in existence. They were stamped at the South Georgia Post Office. All those in circulation were stamped elsewhere and sent out, but the only genuine ones were kept at the post office on South Georgia. These 4 sets were removed during the Falklands War by a member of staff of the British Antarctic Survey. In the few moments the Argentinians allowed them to gather the belongings, everything else was burnt, but these 4 sets were saved and brought to the UK by Robert Headland. Bar currency. The pound sterling is the official currency of the islands, and the same notes and coins are used as in the United Kingdom. For more information on British currency in the wider region, see pound sterling in the South Atlantic and the Antarctic. Flora and fauna. Plants. The parts of the islands that are not permanently covered in snow or ice are part of the Scotia Sea Islands tundra ecoregion. In total there are 26 species of vascular plant native to South Georgia, 6 species of grass, 4 rushes, a single sedge, 6 ferns, 1 club moss and 9 small forbs. There are also about 125 species of moss, 85 of liverworts and 150 lichens, as well as about 50 species of macrofungi. A number of introduced species have become naturalized. Many of these were introduced by whalers in cattle fodder, and some are considered invasive. There are no trees or shrubs on the islands. The largest plant is the tussock grass Poa flabellata. This grows mostly on raised beaches and steep slopes near the shore and may reach 2 meters. Other grasses include the tufted fescue, the alpine catstail and Antarctic hairgrass, and one of the commonest flowering plants is the greater burnet. Birds. South Georgia supports many seabirds, including albatross, a large colony of king penguins and penguins of various other species, along with petrels, primates, lions, shags, skuas, gulls and terns. Birds unique to the archipelago are the South Georgia shag, South Georgia pipit, and the South Georgia pintail. Both South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands have been identified as important bird areas by BirdLife International. Mammals, seals frequent the islands, and whales may be seen in the surrounding waters. There are no native land mammals, though reindeer, brown rats and mice were introduced through the activities of man. Rats, brought to the island as stowaways on sealing and whaling ships in the late 18th century, have caused much damage to native wildlife, destroying tens of millions of ground-nesting birds' eggs and chicks. While previously the island's glaciers formed a natural barrier to the spread of rats, these glaciers are now slowly melting as the climate warms. In 2011, scientists instituted a 4-year program to entirely eradicate the rats and mice, in what would be by far the largest rodent eradication attempt in the world to date. The project was led by zoologist Anthony Martin of the University of Dundee, who stated, "This is a man-induced problem and it's about time that man put right earlier errors." Quote, in July 2013, the success of the main phase of the extermination of the rats, which took place in May that year, was announced. 180 tons of rat poison, brodifacoum, were dropped over 70% of the island, in what was the world's largest ever operation of this kind. Another 95 t of rat poison was planned to be dropped by 3 helicopters in January 2015. In June 2015, the eradication program concluded, apparently successfully, with the island believed, very likely, to be rat-free. Monitoring will continue for a further 2 or 3 years. Reindeer were introduced to South Georgia in 1911 by Norwegian whalers for meat and for sport hunting. In February 2011, the authorities announced that due to the reindeer's detrimental effect on native species and the threat of the spreading to presently pristine areas, a complete cull would take place, leading to the eradication of reindeer from the island. The eradication began in 2013 with 3,500 reindeer killed. Nearly all the rest were killed in early 2014, with the last cleared in the 2014-15 southern summer. Marine ecosystem. The seas around South Georgia have a high level of biodiversity. In a recent study, South Georgia has been discovered to contain one of the highest levels of biodiversity among all the ecosystems on Earth. In respect to species, marine inhabitants endemic to this ecosystem outnumber and surpass well-known regions such as the Galapagos or Ecuador. The marine ecosystem is thought to be vulnerable because its low temperatures mean that it can repair itself only very slowly.